thank you. Let me run my timer so that I can. Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot for putting this paper on the program. So the motivation of the paper is sort of very similar to what Matt started talking about. If you want to think about production in any modern industrialized economies, you can really think of it as a complex network of supply chains. Just to put some numbers on it, this paper by Bernard et al., they document that in a small country like Belgium, the median firm relies on 53 suppliers and 26 customers. And this can become much more skewed for much larger firms like Airbus. At least Airbus claims that they work with 12,000 different suppliers that provide different parts and services. Now, you may want to ask, why do firms essentially locate themselves in supply chains? Why don't they produce the goods themselves? And, the idea is sort of trivial and goes back, maybe you can argue, to Adam Smith. Supply chains allow for better specialization, a finer division of labor, and, eventually increasing productivity. Just, as an example, just to keep in mind, I guess presumably Airbus can produce its engines in-house, but probably it's much more efficient if they outsource it to GE or Rolls-Royce, and they produce those goods. Now, and the idea is that, firms, when they do this specialization and they produce different parts, but then they have to maintain this relationship so that the engine that GE is producing can be actually implemented on Airbus's airplanes. So for example, just to give an idea, Teresa Ford documents that many manufacturing firms rely on customized outsourcing, in the sense that Airbus tells GE, I want this engine with these characteristics, and they maintain a relationship in order for these input products to be able to be combined together, turning into an output. Now, if you buy this story, there's a flip side to it, which again Matt mentioned, and that is that when these supplier-customer relationships are dissolved or are disrupted, then they actually destroy relationship-specific surplus. That the productivity that's encoded in that relationship may actually get damaged, and presumably they can have macroeconomic consequences. So, some of the more recent examples, you can think of natural disasters, the COVID pandemic, to some extent, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and these are more than anecdotes, in the sense that at least policymakers seem to be concerned about these issues. So, going back to 2012, this is a document called the U.S. National Strategy for Global Supply Chain Security, put out by the Obama White House. And, I just quote that they say integrated supply chains are fast and cost efficient, but also susceptible to shocks that can rapidly escalate from localized events into broader disruption. So they add supply chain relationships. They are a source of productivity and specialization. But then the flip side of that, when they're disrupted, they can have negative consequences, not just for the firm, but also for the broader macroeconomy. So what do we do in this paper? This is going to be a theoretical paper to allow us to think about macroeconomic consequences of disruption to supply chains. But before I give you the model and its consequences, I want to make an argument that if you want to study the macroeconomic consequences of supply chains theoretically in a systematic way, you need a model that has at least three ingredients. One is firm-specific relationships that contribute to productivity. So this is exactly the example of GE and Airbus, or any of the other customer suppliers of Airbus. The idea is that there is, the Airbus and GE, Airbus doesn't go to the market, to the bazaar, and shop for engines. They actually, these engines are designed for particular aircraft. And there is this specificity to this relationship. Number two is that once you buy the argument that these relationships are specific, whatever model you write cannot be competitive. Airbus and GE are not price takers. They are not dealing with a large set of other firms. And then finally, whatever model you write, it has to have a non-trivial extensive margin of adjustment. At the end of the day, if you're interested in supply chain disruptions, you want to have a model in which these relationships can break down or can be formed based on firms' technologies and preferences. So that's exactly what we do in this paper. We try to write down a hopefully tractable model that brings all these three ingredients into a single framework. So just to repeat, the model is going to have the productivity in this model is going to be captured, encoded in these supply-customer relationships. These relationships are customized for the two firms that are at the two ends. Firms are going to decide who they form links with. So as a firm, I decide who my suppliers are, who my customers are. So if you can think of this is going to be essentially a model of network formation. And finally, we're going to assume that firms are going to split any surplus they generate via bargaining. But this is not going to be a competitive model. This is a departure from the competitive framework language. So what do we get? Well, first I have to, walk you very quickly over some like basic results that make this framework usable. So I have to talk about existence and uniqueness of equilibria. I'm going to give you some closed form characterization results. Then I'm going to give you some comparative static results, basically thinking about, if I have a disruption here, how would it impact the distribution of surplus throughout the economy? How would it change firms' incentives to form or dissolve relationships with suppliers or customers? And then I'm going to zoom out and talk about macro outcomes. And then I'm going to talk about what I think is more important is thinking about the model's implications for efficiency and fragility. So rather than going through the text, maybe it's easiest if I show our main result via a picture here. So think about here on the x-axis, this is some negative shock to the economy. You can think of like there is a reduction in productivity, some firms' productivity, or it can be some increase in some form of cost. So, and then here on the y-axis, I have aggregate output or GDP. And first look at the blue curve. The blue curve is the aggregate output when under a social planner's problem. So essentially an efficiency benchmark. And as you can see, as the shock increases, essentially the planner cannot produce as much as before and output goes down. Okay, and there may be some kinks, but it goes down continuously. So the first result I'm going to get eventually, hopefully I have time to get to it, is that the red curve, which is the same thing for equilibrium, is below the blue curve. This basically shows you that the model I'm going to present to you is inefficient. So there would be some externalities in this model in how firms form relationships. They don't do it efficiently. And second, not only the red curve is below the blue curve, there are these discontinuities in the red curve that do not exist in it. And these are, you can think of these as sources of fragility. So when there are small shocks to this economy, maybe the some cost goes up only by a little bit, you may actually get very large discontinuities in the GDP in the economy. Essentially, the economy will be impacted very severely at the maximum. So sort of, if you want to this would be sort of the mental picture that comes out of the model, which, hopefully I'll get to. All right, and then we're going to have some other results, which are consequences of these inefficiency fragility, is that you're going to have a productivity fragility trade-off. Essentially, you can think about an economy in which firms decide to have more fragmented supply chains. You're going to have more stages of production, and that would enhance productivity, but it may come at the cost of higher fragility. So then, in most of the times, you're doing well, but in bad times, the economy may actually suffer a lot. Another prediction of the model is that supply chains are going to be pro-cyclical in the sense that in good times, firms are going to invest more in building relationships, and then these bad times, when shocks are realized, firms start dropping these relationships. And finally, I'm going to show you that the model is going to capture a nonlinear amplification mechanism. And sort of the big picture idea is that small shocks in supply chains may not actually be amplified a lot, but it's the large shocks that are going to be amplified. The corollary to this statement is that maybe in standard time, you don't need to worry about, during normal recessions, you don't need to worry about disruption. And it's only like during severe recessions that supply chain disruptions become. All right, so let me skip the literature review and get to the model. As I said, this is going to be a non-competitive model of relationship-specific supply chains. So the model is going to have n plus 1 firms, and firms 1 through n are going to produce different intermediate goods, and there's going to be a firm 0 that produces a final good. We're going to borrow this framework from a paper by Ostrom and Azar, in which firm I has access not just to one production technology, but a host of different production technologies. So think about this Fi, this is the production function of firm I, and it's indexed by different set of inputs II that the firm uses. So I can produce an aircraft with a GE engine, or I can do it with a Rolls-Royce engine. You can treat these as potentially two different technologies that's available to bear. And each one of those technologies would have its own productivity. And then to produce, obviously, you have to use labor and you have to buy intermediate input. Obviously, you buy the intermediate input from the suppliers of that technology. Okay, so as a firm, you can imagine you have access to many different production technologies. Now, this is where we're going to depart from the Ostrom-Lazar paper. And the idea we're going to make is the following assumption, that for a firm to use a particular mix of intermediate inputs, the firm has to establish customized customer supply relationship with each one of those suppliers. So again, if I'm Airbus and I want to use GE, I have to form a relationship with that firm. Like, I have to set up my production plans and I have to design my aircraft such that engine would fit with the rest of them. And at the other side, GE has to do the same. Okay, so formally we're gonna model this the following way: that if firm J wants to be a supplier to firm I, both parties have to pay a fixed cost. The customer pays a fixed cost CIJ, and the supplier pays a cost SIJ. Once we pay the fixed cost, we form a relationship. The key assumption that we're gonna need in this model for everything I'm going to tell you to go through is that these costs are relationship specific. So when I form with the cost I pay to form a relationship with a firm, it cannot be transformed and translated to another firm. And then these costs are sunk. So examples would be, you can customize your product. You have to integrate the production process with the other party. The two firms have to do joint R&D investments that, it's very specific to that relationship, and so on and so forth. So once these firms pay the cost and form the relationship, essentially you're going to be left with a firm level network approach. So that's the production side of the economy. The household side is going to be very boring. There's going to be representative household that provides L units of labor in elasticity to the firms and faces the following budget constraint. So my consumption is going to be equal to the wage income plus any profits the household gets from the firm. And the net profit the firm gets from firm I, the household gets from firm I, is going to be the gross profits of the firm minus whatever cost the firm has to pay to form relationships. Okay, so this is just essentially the household's budget constraint. There's a technical assumption that I skipped. So this is going to be the timing of the model. So it's equal to 0, as I mentioned. Each firm in the economy decides to pay fixed costs to form relationships to serve as a supplier and customer to potentially any other firm in the economy. And if both parties pay the cost, then you end up with a production network, which I'm going to show with G. Now, once then at equal to 1, any two firms that have a relationship, they have to negotiate over a pairwise contract. And if the two firms agree to the contract, then they can trade at equal to 2. I haven't told you yet how the contracts are formed, but once the two firms form a contract, write a contract, then that's at equal to 2. Basically, it's when firms make input-output decisions and the households make their consumption decisions. Okay, so the last thing I have to tell you about the model is essentially what type of contract. So we're going to assume that firms are going to write two-part tariffs in the following sense. If firm I and J get together, they're going to write a contract which has two components. One is a per unit price. So imagine Chad is my supplier and he promises to deliver as many units as I demand at this fixed price PIJ. But then in exchange, I'm going to pay him an upfront lump sum transfer TIJ. So I pay him this transfer and then he makes this commitment. And we're going to assume that these prices and transfers can be contingent on the set of relationships in the economy. Okay, and now given this, you can basically write down the firm's profit. So the net profit, remember, is the gross profit minus whatever cost you pay to form relationships. But then the gross profits of firm I is my sales to any customer minus whatever expenditure I have on my intermediate inputs, minus any expenditure I have on labor inputs. Then I make these then I get these transfers from my customers, but then I have to make these transfers to my potential suppliers. So this would be firm's gross profit. Okay, and these are the contracts. And now this is where the non-competitive part comes in. We're going to assume that firms are going to do Nash bargaining over these contracts. So basically, the contracts that Chad and I agree to is going to be the outcome of Nash bargaining between Chad and I, where theta I is the bargaining power of firm I, and theta J is going to be the bargaining power of firm J. Okay, so we're going to just assume standard Nash bargaining. All right, so just summarize: equal to 0, firms pay cost, form relationship. Equal to 1, firms that have a relationship, they bargain over these two-part tariff contracts. Equal to 2, if they agree, is when production and consumption take place. Okay, so now to analyze the model, I'm going to start at equal to 1 and 2. For now, ignore equal to 0. Essentially, I'm going to take the network G as exogenous, and then I'm going to go back to equal to 0 and analyze it. So first, let's look at exogenous production network. To do this, I'm going to define two concepts that are going to be crucial. First, I'm going to define the aggregate productivity given a production network G is the maximum amount of the final good the economy can produce per unit of labor. So you can think of this aggregate productivity object as parameters in the production possibility frontier. So if network G1 is a subset of G2, there are fewer relationships, then obviously you can produce fewer goods. This is a statement about essentially the frontier, the production possibility. And I'm going to say a network is feasible if the total cost of forming the relationships is less than the total output that those relationships can generate. Essentially saying that the costs fall inside the production possibility. Okay, so now this is the first result just to get me started. So it says that if the network is feasible, an equilibrium exists, and it's generically unique, and all supply customer relationships are formed. All supply customer relationships reach an agreement. All supply customer pairs within the G reach an agreement when they part. Now let me get to the characterization. So the first part of this theorem says that all intermediate input producers are going to price the marginal cost. Essentially, they're not going to be any markups. The reason is that when Chad and I bargain, we bargain over it by assumption, bargain over these two-part tariff contracts, which means that what is going to maximize the size of the surplus between the two of us is that Chad is going to price the marginal cost and then extract any surplus he wants from me via those transfers. That's why firms are going to have marginal cost price. Now, what are those transfers? Well, those transfers are going to be such that any firm I profit, even a particular production network, is going to be given by this expression. So for those of you who remember your 1950s game theory, this is just a variation of capital value. But for those of you who don't, this is actually sort of very intuitive object. It basically says the expression in red here is the marginal contribution of firm I to aggregate productivity when I look at a subset of firms T. So this is aggregate productivity when the set of active firms is T without I, and a firm add firm I, this is by how much aggregate productivity goes up. So this is essentially marginal contribution to aggregate productivity. And then I'm going to have a weighted average of these marginal contribution to aggregate productivity where the weights are given by firms' bargaining powers. Okay, so this is sort of a characterization of firm profits. Because this is a little bit of a maybe an unfamiliar expression, let me go through a very quick example to give you a sense. Imagine this very simple economy in which firms 0 and 1 are the two present firms. For now, ignore firm 2. Well, this result reduces to the following standard, what you would expect, that firm 0 is going to, the two firms are going to split the total surplus that they generate together proportionate to the bargain. Now, let me add firm 2 to this economy. Now, the same expression of capital value expression I showed you is going to do the following. It says the firm 1's profit is be whatever it had before plus this new blue term. What is this new blue term? Well, it's easy to sort of get a sense of what it does. Imagine this firm 2 is completely useless in the sense that it adds nothing to aggregate productivity. In this case, this term is going to be 0, exactly as if firm 2 is not there. If firm 2 produces goods that substitute to firm 1, then this blue term is going to be negative. Essentially, firm 2 is going to steal some business from firm 1, as you would expect, because firm 1 has a competitor. And now if this good 2 is a complement to good 1, then that's going to increase. The profit. Okay. So with that said, now let me get to efficiency. So now remember, I'm still assuming that the production network is exogenous. Then, given this exogenous production network, the equilibrium is going to be efficient, and this is just the consequence of the fact that firms price the marginal cost. So the implication of this is that any inefficiency I'm going to show you now is going to come from the fact that supply-customer relationships are exogenous. All right. So now, let me skip the comparative static result because I'm running low on time, but let me just define give you one assumption that I would need. I'm going to say, if I have two production networks, G1 and G2, I'm going to say the aggregate productivity is supermodular. If I add a relationship to firm G2, to network G2, it's going to raise aggregate productivity by more than if I add it to G1. Okay? So this is just what I mean by supermodularity, and you can have an intensive margin equivalent version of that as well. Okay, so let me skip this comparative static and get to what I'm more interested in, how firms actually form relationships. So here is the result. It says if aggregate productivity is supermodular, then an endogenous network equilibrium exists. Even though their equilibrium is not unique, there always exists the greatest equilibrium G star that contains all other equilibria subnetworks, and that aggregate output and all firms' profits are going to be highest in this G star. So from now on, I'm going to look at this G star because it's as if this is the equilibrium that has no coordination. Now, this result says that this is the consequence of the previous one, is that if once you have this supermodularity, and you increase any of these fixed costs of forming relationships, that's going to shrink the set of supply-customer relationships that are active in equilibrium. It's going to reduce all firm profit, and it's going to reduce aggregate output. Same thing, if you reduce any of the pairwise productivity, firms are going to drop their supply-customer linkages. They're going to reduce their net profits are going to go down, and aggregate output is going to fall. Okay, so this is the sense in which I mentioned earlier, the supplier-customer relationships are going to be pro-cyclical. In downturn, the firms are going to shed these supplier-customer relationships because they're no longer as profitable. So now with that said, let's get to the to inefficiency and fragility results. The theorem says if aggregate output is supermodular, then G star, which is the greatest equilibrium production network, is going to be a subset of what a planner would have done if the planner could choose all relationships. A different way of saying the statement is that firms underinvest in this model in their supplier-customer relationship. To understand the economics of this, it's better to think about there are really two economic mechanisms underpinning this inefficiency. So think about adding a relationship IJ to a network G. When you add a new relationship to the economy, it's going to change firm profits via two channels. On the one hand, obviously, it's going to expand the production possibility frontier, which means that firms are going to be there is more resources to be produced, and there is more surplus in the economy, and this is going to be shared among all firms. But the firm INJ who are paying the cost of firm in that relationship, they're not going to be able to appropriate all the surplus that they generate. So this essentially creates a positive externality on all other firms, and it's a force towards underinvestment. Chad and I make the investment, it benefits not just us, but Chad suppliers and my customers and the rest of the firms in the economy. So that becomes a force towards underinvestment. The policymaker would have wanted us to invest more. The other mechanism is that once we add a relationship, this is actually going to change the bargaining positions of firms in this pairwise bargaining problem. And it would help I&J above and beyond what the planner would have wanted. Essentially, this creates a negative business dealing externality and a force towards equilibrium over investment. The supermodularity assumption that I impose on this result ensures that the net externality is going to be positive. Essentially, the surplus expansion effect is going to dominate surplus redistribution effect. That's why there is going to be underinvestment in equilibrium in this model. Okay, so that's inefficiency. Now I'm going to talk about fragility. So let me call what this Y efficient and Y star to be aggregate output in the efficient allocation and under equilibrium. This result says the efficient allocation is going to be continuous in all the shocks, whereas Y star is going to be discontinuous. This is sort of the result I showed you in the very first graph. Essentially, an interpretation of this is that equilibrium supply chains are not only inefficient, but also are excessively fragile because you're going to have these discontinuities. A different way of saying this is that the fragility and efficiency are in this model are two sides of the same coin. They're really one and the same. To give you the intuition for this result, it's easy to think about a very simple example. Imagine I have a pair of firms I and J, and the only relationship that requires a fixed cost is this relationship. Imagine everything else is either free or completely just not worth it. And let's think about what happens if I increase the fixed cost of this relationship in the efficient allocation. Well, obviously, as the cost of the relationship increases, as S goes to the right, the social planner, keeps this relationship, but now has to spend more resources to keep this relationship going. And obviously, output is going to fall. Beyond a certain threshold here, then this relationship is no longer worth it. So the planner drops the relationship, and beyond which, if I increase the cost of that relationship, well, it has no effect on us. But now let's think about what happens in equilibrium. Well, remember, in equilibrium, the firm is going to drop this relationship before the planner would have wanted the firm to do it. That's really the inefficiency in this model. So what happens is that as I increase this S, at some point from J is going to drop this relationship, and I'm going to go down to the level that the planner would have gone to at a different point. Essentially, firm J is going to drop this relationship at its indifferent point, but that's different from the planner's indifferent point, which is going to be here. And that's really the source of the inefficiency here. Okay, and that's what gives you the inefficiency, gives you this discontinuity. So that's why I said inefficiency and fragility are two sides of the same coin. Okay, so I forgot how much time I have. Chad can help me 1 minute, I guess. So this is going to be
about 2 minutes on the resume.
Okay, sounds great. So I can get to at least one of the applications here. So imagine you have a very siloed economy. So I'm not showing the rest of the economy. I'm just showing you a pair of firms here. And imagine this is an vertically integrated architecture. And now imagine I consider an alternative architecture in which I have like a fragmented relationship. So rather than firm J selling to firm I, J is going to sell to K, which is going to process it and give it to firm I. And I'm going to just impose the assumption that fragmentation increases aggregate productivity. Okay, so this is something that's good. It raises efficiency. Now, this result says that there is going to be a threshold below which the fragmented economy is going to be better, but beyond which the integrated economy is going to be better. What is the intuition for this result? It's again easy to do it in a figure like this. So let's start from here. When the fixed costs are small, but the fragmented economy is going to be more productive than the integrated economy just by assumption. So fragmentation raises productivity because of specialization. But remember, both of these two economies are going to go through their own points of discontinuity. And it's totally possible under certain parameterization that the fragmented economy is going to go through its discontinuity before the integrated economy. So essentially, not only, even though you get a higher productivity here, you're going to get a larger drop and an earlier drop in response to shocks in the fragmented economy than in the integrated economy. So this is what I mentioned in the beginning, that you're going to face a trade-off between fragility and productivity. So we're going to have two more applications, but because I don't have time, I just mentioned them. You can have like strong amplification mechanisms in this model, and there's going to be a nonlinear amplification mechanism in the model, by which I mean that this is there's going to be small shocks are not going to be amplified by much in this economy, but large shocks are going to be amplified significantly. Or a different way of saying the same statement is that supply chain disruptions become more relevant during severe downturns than just more your year-to-year fluctuation. So let me just stop here. I presented a tractable macro model of supply chains. In our view, it captures like three really important ingredients that not all three show up in a single model to the best of our knowledge. Firm-specific relationships that contribute to productivity, which requires a departure from a competitive framework, and a non-trivial excessive margin of adjustment. And the model delivers, we think, this interesting result that there is inefficiency that exists in forming relationships is really the core at the fragility that arises in supply chain. And that leads to a productivity fragility trade-off and a nonlinear application mechanism. Okay, so let me stop here.